of aging in prison. Almost 2,000 people have spent decades languishing behind bars, subject to endless punishment and pain and suffering and difficulty. They present no present danger to public safety, and they have families and they have communities that are waiting for them at home. Yet the state of New Jersey continues to keep them behind bars, only to grow sick and die. Many of you know the name of Sundiata Acoli as an example of a great tragedy that we have coming from this state and in this country. Sundiata Acoli is an 84-year-old prisoner who has spent almost 50 years in prison. Since 1973, he has been locked away behind bars, and he continues to suffer even with almost 30 years without disciplinary infraction. Where is the justice? Where is the reason? Where is the logic behind keeping our women and men who are aging and getting sick and costing more and more for the state to be able to take care of? What is the good sense? What is the morality behind caging old people? Welcome to this virtual conversation. It is important that we hear voices that can help us to explain what is happening in the state of New Jersey and how we can begin to better understand this issue and change the reality. I thank you for joining us tonight. I thank you for being a part of this virtual conversation. And I am excited to welcome some voices and some perspectives that are absolutely essential in this hour. We have a number of speakers tonight that are going to share with us, and I want to make sure that you know that your voice is important as well. So as you hear the voices of women and men who are formerly incarcerated, as you hear the voices of those who are fighting this good fight in the courtrooms and in the legal area, that you know that we need to hear your voice, we need to hear your questions, we need to hear your comments. And so I would encourage you to go to the question and answer box that you have in this Zoom webinar format and put your questions there, because at the end of all of the presentations, we will go back, we will look at the questions, we will seek to lift up as many as we can so that we can give you answers that answer, so that we can begin to approach solutions that solve. So welcome to this critical conversation. Welcome to this listening session, this learning session, this loving session, this liberating session on caging old people. We're going to hear a perspective from Alex Bailey. Alex leads the Sentencing Project's campaign to end life imprisonment, but she is also a community organizer at heart. Alex focuses her work on challenging the system and sentencing laws that have made America the world leader in incarceration. The so-called land of the free, home of the brave, is the home of the greatest proportion of prisoners that we see anywhere in the world. And her priorities include supporting efforts to end life without parole, capping maximum penalties at 20 years, promoting, quote, second look provisions, and fostering a culture shift that rejects excessive punishments in favor of restorative approaches to public safety. Living in an impacted family and a community drives the work that she does every day, and we are thankful to have Alex join us, and we welcome you to this conversation. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you so much, Reverend. And I want to start out by saying thank you to Cynthia, because it is very easy in the world of legislation and law and academics to forget the real human cost of what we do in the brutality that we enact by the entirety of our carceral system, but very specifically with what we do to seniors. So by way of introduction about myself, my name is Alexandra Bailey. As the Reverend said, I head the campaign to end life imprisonment. And I want to sort of just jump right in with something that you said, Reverend, about the level of investment that goes into keeping an elderly person incarcerated. The day they sentence somebody to a life without parole sentence is $1 million investment in taking someone's life and an incalculable divestment from our community as a whole. It's staggering to me. Now, in the state of New Jersey, 42% of lifers, I'm gonna repeat that, 42% of lifers are 55 and older. Past the age of 55, you are looking at about a 37% increase in health costs. So if the human cost wasn't enough, we are draining our coffers to do the wrong thing. Rather than start upstream and be preventative, we have just decided to be addicted to incarceration, which is completely counterfactual to everything we know that actually keeps society safe. Our sentencing policies, rather than crime, are what actually drive mass incarceration. And we continue to expand and create an ever-growing list of crimes for which you can be sentenced to life without parole or virtual life. For example, we've seen a 9% increase around the country in terms of sentences around robbery or aggravated assault, felony murder laws, where you yourself did not commit the murder, can land you in prison, life without parole. There are states that are celebrated for having abolished felony murder, like Michigan, where the statute is actually still alive and well and being used. New Jersey specifically has the highest percentage, has one of the highest percentages of elderly life sentence people. Delaware, Maine, Michigan, New Jersey, North Carolina, that's the ranking. That makes New Jersey 4th. Now that to me is pretty staggering. And we've seen a 66% increase in LWOP, life without parole, since we first took a census of it in 2003. If that weren't disturbing enough, now we see women serving LWOP sentences increasing 43% between 2008 and 2020. Now, this is not because our crime rates are going up. Year to year, a crime rate might climb, but we look at statistics over time. Our crime rates are decreasing. Our brutality in our incarceral system is not. What we know is that criminal careers are only about 10 years long, and the people that you are identifying represent the lowest rate of recidivism that exists within our system. To give you some statistics about this, so the Bureau of Justice, their stats show that the peak age of arrest for robbery is 19. For murder, it's 20 years old. We're talking about a gentleman, you said he's gonna be 85?
85
in January, is that correct? 85 in January. There is no rational, statistical reason to keep anybody in jail at that point. And that's before you even begin to talk about the level of treatment that Cynthia identified.
Alex, say that again. That's a headline that we need to hear.
Which part?
That there is no rational reason, that there is no statistic, that part.
There is no statistic. There is no rational reason. There is no fiscal, moral reason that we should be doing this. These people represent no threat to society. We've already taken their life and we won't give them the dignity of a decent death. So I'll end there. There are many more stats that I can share with you, but I want everybody to remember that 42% of the lifers in the state of New Jersey are age 55 and older. That is a significant portion of the lifer population.
You know, before I came to New Jersey, I lived in Alabama. And frequently we found ourselves at the bottom of statistical charts, and we would always say, thank God for Mississippi. because Mississippi was 50 when we were off in 49th. But in the state of New Jersey, when we look at what is happening with our prisoners, when we look at the cost, you talked about earlier about how much it costs to keep someone in prison for life. You have politicians and legislators that argue and fight and grandstand about budgets and how we need to save money. Could you say a little bit more about what does it cost to keep someone in prison for 50 years? What does it cost to, in terms of medical expenses, all the things that Cynthia was mentioning? I mean, what is the cost to the taxpayer?
Well, let's be clear. We don't know the genuine cost because we don't offer good food or healthcare, right? So the genuine cost of what this would be to actually keep people healthy is a number that we don't have because, as Cynthia pointed out, we don't do that. What we do know is that past the age of 55, you're talking about a 37% jump in what you're spending. The day someone gets sentenced to a life without parole, like I said, that's at least $1 million investment. And it is an incalculable divestment from children, grandchildren, mentoring, people who could be violence interrupters, people who could tell everyone in that legislature what they need to do to prevent this upstream, which will not only keep us in the moral right, but it will keep us in the fiscal right. And yet we decide to invest incorrectly.
So we
have to take accountability for that.
Yeah, accountability, fiscal accountability, social accountability, moral accountability. We have the tremendous cost just to provide the terrible treatment and resource bare realities that our prisoners are facing, and our elderly prisoners in particular. But then the community costs. You know, what does it cost to take another father and a mother out of a home, another grandfather, another grandmother out of the home? What is the broader cost?
How do we even study it? I don't think it can be studied. But you know, between 1993 and 2013, people 55 to 65 expanded more than 150% nationwide. So if you just want to talk about the fiscal responsibility, nationwide, you can do the math. It's a silly number. So if there are people within your legislature where the only thing they ever want to talk about is the fiscal argument because they don't want to take the moral responsibility for what we have done, which is wrong, then in addition to everything else that Cynthia identified, we are torturing people at a very high point of cost.
And all of the statistics and all of the studies show that when you have people who are of this age, that the likelihood of recidivism, that the threat to public safety that they represent, as it was said, that to tell a grandmother, a grandfather that they still represent a significant threat to society is absolutely ridiculous and not supported by any facts.
Even people designated as quote unquote chronic offenders, people with long records. What we also know is that most of them don't engage in any criminal activity by the time they hit their 30s. The average criminal career is about 10 years long. And so many things are committed as youth and juveniles when the brain is not fully developed. And that's before we talk about the situation. We don't look at these situations in the concept of dual victimhood.
Yeah.
For all of the people that I have met who are incarcerated and returning citizens that I have had the privilege and honor of meeting, I am amazed that they first survived what society placed them in. Then I am amazed that they have survived the torturous system that we placed them in under the guise of public safety.
Yeah.
And then I am most amazed by the kindness that they still continue to show despite the level of harm that we as a society have done to them.
Yeah.
They deserve better.
As you said, there's no rationale, there's no logic, there's no statistic, there's no academic study that supports keeping someone like Sundiata Kohli, 84-year-old grandfather, almost 30 years without a disciplinary infraction held in prison, someone who actually teaches the classes They have him teach the class for younger prisoners to come in terms of how they can make sure that they don't come back to prison. He has gone through every resource. He is someone who is a shining example of someone who has remorse, of someone who has a community that loves him, that cares for him, that has a family that wants him to come home. But then we get politics, we get answers that do not answer, we get solutions that do not solve, we get conclusions that only conclude with death and dying. And go ahead.
And the last thing that I want to say about this is that there's also a false narrative that I think we need to talk about on this panel, which is the thing that legislators always say, and I'm sure everybody here has heard of, what about the victim? What about them? Mm-hmm. There's also this false understanding that this is what people who are quote unquote victims want. This doesn't keep us safer. The reconciliations that I have been able to see, and Reverend, that I'm sure that you have seen, between families is the true healing that we need in this society, not more incarceration. And I say that as a woman who has survived violent crime, as well as lived in a family where there is someone in my family that I might never see again without bars or glass in between us. It doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. And I seriously hope that at 85, he'll be able to hug his grandchildren and live the rest of his life in the peace that he deserves, that he has earned.
I wish it would be at 84. I don't even want to wait until January.
If you go by the Sentencing Project's research, he should have gotten a second look at 10 years.
In 10 years.
At 10 years. 50 is ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, when they're taking these looks, what they're seeing is someone who they want to have to die in prison. When they're taking a look at his case, all reason, all logic, all rationale goes out the window. And it happens with so many. I want to ask you one more question before we go to our next speaker in terms of, so we know we're talking, you've given us a lot of statistical information about the 42% of those who are serving these life without the possibility of parole sentences are 55 years and older. What do they look like in terms of race and ethnicity? You know, what's the impact that we're having on the Black and brown communities in particular in the state of New Jersey when we look at these statistical realities of our older people who are being caged?
Well, everybody hold on to your seats, because I think I'm going to shock you when I say it's exactly what you would expect it to be. The slant, and I'll actually go take a look to give you the actual statistics, because I do have them, just don't have them in front of me right now. But you're looking at great disparity. You're looking at great disparity. And it shows up in our community. Like I said, it is an incalculable divestment. We place people in difficult and traumatic situations. We give them few options. And then we punish them for the scene that we created for them. Mm-hmm. And by we, I mean a society at large. Right. And then we want to act shocked and make money off of their bodies. Right. And it is as racist as it was founded to be, as it was created to be.
Thank you.
But I'll get you the exact numbers for New Jersey, but it follows national trends.
We're going to have some more questions for you. Thank you, Alexandra Bailey, Alex Bailey,
Thank you.
The head of the Sentencing Project's campaign to end life imprisonment. We are so thankful for your witness and what you've shared for us today. And I want our listeners and those who are viewing and watching to know that behind all of these statistics are real people. Are real people who have families, who live in communities. Sundiata Acoli is someone who I got to know when I was a college student, which was over half of my life ago, and I was able to connect with him as a young student, I learned about him because of his background as a freedom fighter, someone who was a part of the voting rights movement and the civil rights movement, who was a part of the Black liberation movement in the 1970s. He was someone who had committed his life to struggle on behalf of oppressed people. And he had been listed at that time by Amnesty International USA as a political prisoner, a prisoner of conscience. And I wrote him a letter. And I wrote him, and I had a long list of prisoners who were identified as political prisoners during that time. And I wrote letters to every single one of them. Alex, I'm horrified and saddened and angered to report that some of those people that I wrote letters to, and some of those who wrote back to me, like Albert New Washington, have died. He died in prison in 2000 from cancer at the age of 64. As recently as this year, we have Romaine Chip Fitzgerald, who was 71 years old when he died this past spring. But he had a stroke back in 1998 and was in a wheelchair and never fully recovered from that. And we still have political prisoners, and we still have men and women who are in prison, like Jamil Abdul Alamin, who is 77 years old, who is blind and fighting cancer. Like Mutulu Shakur, who is fighting cancer. Like Russell Maroon Schultz, who is fighting cancer. We have people who are in prison who need to be under medical care, who need to be in the care of their families and communities, who have served these long sentences that go far beyond what would ever have been required in any sane society or any just system. And Sundiata Acoli is a clear example for the state of New Jersey. Has been in prison since 1973, has a number of presenting health contradictions and crises, and we go to the governor. We call upon Governor Phil Murphy. We call upon those who are the political leaders in our state. We're going to the courts. There is we're looking forward to arguments coming before the Supreme Court, and we're going to hear more about that a little later. But I want people to know that behind every statistic you gave about recidivism, about life without the possibility of parole, about the disproportionate numbers that we're going to hear that are Black and brown, there are real people. There are real people, real human beings that are a part of this. I know we had another speaker, and I thought I saw something in the chat, and we had a brother, Marvin Ellison, who was actually going to be one of our speakers for today. Am I right that we don't have Marvin with us on the phone? We lost him on the phone. Is that correct?
That's correct. We're waiting to get him back now. But
all right, so we'll bring him back on after we bring on the next speaker, who will be able to tell us about some of what is happening in the courts and about what the battle in New Jersey looks like. We're bringing you a warrior of the courtroom who will tell us about what that looks like, and very particular, talk a little bit more about Sundiata's case. I am blessed to introduce to you Mr. Larry Lustberg, who co-chairs the Gibbons Commercial and Criminal Litigation Group. He leads the criminal defense practice. He's the longtime director of the firm's John J. Gibbons Fellowship in Public Interest and Constitutional Law, which litigates historic cutting-edge civil rights and civil liberties cases. Prior to joining the firm as its first Gibbons Fellow, he served as the Assistant Federal Public Defender for the District of New Jersey for 5 years, and previously served as a law clerk for the Honorable H. Lee Sarakin, the United States District Judge. Larry is a former president of both the Association of the Federal Bar of New Jersey and the Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers of New Jersey, each of which has awarded him its highest honor, the William J. Brennan Jr. Award and Honorable Lawrence A. Whipple Memorial Award, respectively. But I came to know Larry after all of this, and I have another half paragraph here I can read about his great works that he has done. But he has joined his legal genius and his commitment and his voice to this campaign to bring Sundiata home. You all need to look that up if you haven't already. Hashtag bring Sundiata home. But I want, Larry, if you could talk to us about how this refusal by the state of New Jersey to release Sundiata, who has been eligible for parole for decades, how it exemplifies what is wrong in New Jersey, what is wrong with the New Jersey Parole Board, and how the crisis of incarcerated elders, of caged older people is laid bare and clear when we look at his case, and give us some updates in terms of what's happening as far as Sundiata's case and the amicus briefs that have recently been filed. I don't know how much you can talk about that, but if you could share from your perspective from inside of the courtrooms.
Thanks, Reverend, and thanks everybody for being here. This is really an important topic for us to be talking about, and it's important in part because honestly, not that many people talk about it. The people who are on this webinar are extraordinary by virtue of the fact that you care about not only this person, but these issues. And that's what it's all about. I'm a lucky man because if I care about an issue, I get to stand up in a courtroom and say, hey, judge, listen to me, and try to change the world. For all of you, that's harder. You have to organize movements. You have to elect candidates. It's expensive and time consuming and difficult. I'm a lucky man because every single day I get to go to court and fight for what I believe in. And what we're talking about today is something I believe in. Let me summarize for you in just a couple of words what I think about Sundiata's case. It is an example of New Jersey lawlessness. It is an example of New Jersey's apathy about science. And let me talk to you about each of those two things. Let me start with science. The science, the statistics, they are real. They are indisputable. It is 100% clear that there is what I call in our brief an age crime curve, which starts in the middle adult years that are long in Sundiata's rearview mirror. And here's what those statistics show. And they show it in every state in the union, and they show it in every country in the world, and they show it, yes, right here in New Jersey. Older inmates are significantly less likely to commit offenses with each passing year. Let me say it again. Each year. The older you get, the less likely it is that you will ever commit another offense. Why is this important? Well, and let me add one other thing before I tell you why it's important. This is even true for people who commit the most serious offenses in our society, whether those are homicides or armed robberies or whatever. It does not matter. And in fact, the statistics seem to show that people who committed the offense that Sundiata is alleged to have committed are more likely to become rehabilitated and to not recidivate. Why is this important? It's important because the law says in New Jersey that one is supposed to be released on parole unless there is, I'm going to quote the law to you, unless there is a substantial likelihood that that person will reoffend upon release, a substantial likelihood that they will reoffend upon release. In this case, the parole board ignored the science, which made 100% clear that Sundiata Acoli had no likelihood of recidivating, none whatsoever. So what were they doing there? They were punishing him further, but the law there is clear too. The parole system sets a time at which somebody is supposed to be released after they have been punished enough. And anything beyond that has one purpose only, and that purpose is to protect society. But let's be clear, the science shows, and by the way, the facts of Sundiata's case show that he is not likely to reoffend, that he is not dangerous. Now, there are a number, Reverend, you asked this question about other amicus briefs. There are amicus briefs that quite correctly make the argument that, you know, he's being punished for another reason, which is because he has spoken out, because of what his beliefs are. That I do not disagree with any of those arguments. But what I'm here to talk about today, what the topic of this program is the way New Jersey has, by continuing to incarcerate him, by not considering his age, and when I say not considering his age, I mean, I wish I could read to you from the ridiculous parole board decision in this case. It's too long, and I hate to dignify it by reading it. But it's clear that while the court says we considered age, they didn't consider the age crime curve. They didn't consider the fact that Sundiata is unlikely to reoffend, and they didn't put that into the relevant legal framework, which is if he's unlikely to reoffend, he needs to be released. That is the law. The parole board is unscientific, and they're lawless. And they're lawless not only because they ignore the appropriate standards, they're also lawless because they don't do it the right way. They don't even explain their reasoning. It's all, and pardon my French, bullshit. That's what they do. So look, I mean, and his case is such a such a great example of this. I mean, the offense at issue here was committed in 1973. He had a parole eligibility date in 1993. We are now almost 20 years after that, and we're still fighting for him. Why is that? Because, and let me just say this, in 2010, he was given a parole eligibility date of 10 years after that, 2020, which would have happened already. He appealed, and the court said, and the appellate court at that time said, that's ridiculous. He should be released. The parole board appealed to the New Jersey Supreme Court, which said that's wrong. It has to go back to the parole board for them to make a determination. And when it went back, what did they do? Now, instead of imposing a new parole term of 10 years out, now they imposed a new parole term of 15 years out. This is as he is in his 80s and is no danger whatsoever. This is a man who has served all of that time, almost 50 years. No civilized country would allow a sentence of 50 years. And they do it without the rudimentary requirements of due process, which is that you explain it. You explain how a person like this really is a danger, notwithstanding the science and notwithstanding the law. That's what it's about. So it's an outrage. It's an outrage. And so what do we do about that?
Yeah.
Let me actually, before I go to that, I'm just going to finish with that, Rev. But before I do, let me just fill in one of the gaps in Alex's awesome presentation.
Let me say it's been almost 30 years after his original, not almost 20.
Oh no, you're sorry.
You got the law, but
that's why I'm a lawyer, not a.
And my math is not, but we're going on 30 years.
Yep, 50 years. 50 years.
Right.
Almost. You're 100% right. By the way, here's the numbers. In New Jersey, if you are a Black person, you are, and this is the number, you are 12 times more likely to be incarcerated than if you are a white person. These statistics have endured no matter what criminal justice reforms there have been over years and years and years. And do you know where that places us in our nation in terms of the disparity between the treatment of Blacks and whites?
Where's that?
We are the worst. We're not second, we're not fourth, we're not fifth, we're not 10th, we're not 48th. We are the worst state in the nation when it comes to that. By the way, I'm also.
So we can't say thank God for Mississippi then.
I mean, even there, you can't say thank God to Mississippi. I mean, let me just tell you, I mean, and nor just, and this is a little off topic, but nor should you think this is an aberration. I'm also litigating a case to try to desegregate New Jersey's public schools. New Jersey's public schools are the 5th most segregated in the nation. So you shouldn't think that this is some aberrational racist thing. This is part of our DNA in the state. And it's why people need to stand up and fight. And it's what I'm going to spend the rest of my life doing, is what I've been doing for the last 35 years. And I can intend to die doing it. Let me just say, though, with regard to this issue of older inmates, there is some hope. And I want to tell you what that hope is, because in addition to fighting for Sundiata, each and every one of you should be thinking about supporting certain legislative initiatives and seeing that hope, because hope feeds us as we try to make the world a better place. Number one, the New Jersey Supreme Court, before whom we will be arguing Sundiata's case at some as yet undetermined time, it's pretty much fully briefed. And, you know, hopefully within the first few months of this term, but if you want my guess, it'll probably be sometime after the new year.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard to say. It should be sooner because he's sitting there rotting, and, you know, the court should care about that, but that doesn't always happen. In any event, the Supreme Court handed down a decision in a case called Torres a few months ago, in which it said judges who are considering very long sentences, what we call concurrent sentences, where you're piling one on top of another, that they have to consider a person's age. So this is a big breakthrough, and I think a sign of hope in what's to come in Sundiata's case. Second, there's legislation that has been introduced, that has to be reintroduced, that would allow for something called rehabilitative release, even for older inmates and even for inmates who have been found guilty of violent crimes. Now, that legislation died the first time around, but there's a significant effort to reintroduce it in the lame duck session. Keep your eyes open for a rehabilitative release statute. I'm working on drafting it right now. And I have, and based on best practices around the nation and world, and based upon what other states are doing, which in some ways even puts us to shame. I mean, Kansas is better than us, just so you have a sense of what I'm talking about. We can do better, and we can do better in the courts, and we can do better in legislation. But finally, there are other rays of hope here. In the last number of years, New Jersey has focused on the re-entry of prisoners, on the idea that people who come out of jail should get a fair shake. And part of that bespeaks a certain sense that maybe we are getting to a place where we can forgive, where we can allow for redemption, where we can give people hope that they won't die behind prison walls. Does this help Sundiata? Not unless we get him out, and we gotta. But the notion that society is beginning to think that maybe we shouldn't punish somebody for the rest of their lives, that they should have some hope in the future, is honestly a good sign. And I work with a lot of people in the reentry community. So, you know, that community is also overwhelmingly Black and Latinx. But the success stories are extraordinary. If people are given a chance, if they're given support, if they're given services, if they're made part of the community again, they don't go back to jail in nearly the numbers that they would if they're just abandoned on the streets, left without their prescriptions, left without housing, left without employment opportunities. So there's stuff that we can do in a broader sense. But for now, in this case, our job is to get Sundiata Acoli home. And I will tell you, I go into every case thinking I'm going to win it, and I think we're going to win it. I really think that this is a case where the parole board went so wrong, was so far beyond what the law and science permit and require, that the decision below just has to be reversed, and he has to win and come home. But none of that would be possible without the people on this call, the advocates who have stood up for him, some extraordinary people who are not only extraordinary for how brilliant they are, but even more so for how caring they are. And I want you to know, as I sit here right now, how much I and others who do law reform work really do care about that. So thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you. And again, for those who may have missed it, Larry is the co-chair of the Gibbons Commercial and Criminal Litigation Group. He's leading the criminal defense practice. He's the director of the John J. Gibbons Fellowship in Public Interest in Constitutional Law. He is a legal warrior who has been fighting civil rights and civil liberties cases for a very long time and is on the front line, the legal front line of fighting for Sundiata Acoli, the 84-year-old political prisoner that has been in prison 48 years, almost 50 years, almost 30 years without disciplinary infractions, and who we need to bring Sundiata home, hashtag bring Sundiata home. Thank you, Larry, for sharing your wisdom and your perspective. We pulled you off the screen too quick. I wanted to ask you another question. Specifically about when you were giving hope, and the possibilities. There have been some recent changes in terms of prisoners who were released in the midst of the COVID-19 global pandemic. Could you talk a little bit about maybe some of the things that are trending and that made it through the legislature and maybe help us? I know, all of us can't fight it out in the courtroom, but are there, some of the mechanisms that might be available for those who want to push to bring elderly prisoners home? Like in terms of next steps, What can we do? I'm going to give some things about Sundiata Acoli, but in a broader context, as it relates to our elderly prisoners, what are some things that we can do? And are there some things that have happened recently in the last year that give us some hope about some possibilities?
Yeah, as I was, thanks. As I was saying before, I do think there's some rays of hope. There have been some favorable decisions. You're 100% correct that that there were a number of releases as a result of COVID, and some of those were elderly people. In fact, the first group included a number of elderly people. But I just don't want anybody to have too much rose-colored glasses here. As a person who spent a lot of my early career fighting against the death penalty, one thing I learned was that, you know, successful fights against the death penalty only last until the next murder that everybody gets excited about.
Yeah.
And then suddenly there's pressure to bring it back. And I just noticed this past weekend that some legislator in South Jersey is making noise about how some of the people who were released under the COVID program went out and committed additional crimes. There will always be pressure from people to punish and to be more draconian rather than more compassionate. That is a rule. This is a fight that goes on. As far as what people can do, as I said, keep your eyes on the legislature. There are some really interesting reforms that are in the works, both in terms of what we call compassionate release, which is what a lot of the COVID cases were, but more in terms of the rehabilitative release that I discussed a little bit earlier. There will be a program that will be specifically applicable to people serving long sentences that will allow them to be released because they posed no danger. Sound familiar? If that program existed, then maybe Sundiata Acoli would have been released when he should have been in 1993. Maybe he would at least have been released in 2010 when the parole board gave him 10 more years. The notion that they now at this age, almost 85, gets another hit of 15 years tells you everything you need to know about the dysfunction of the system. Right. Let me just say one other thing, and then I promise I'll shut up. You mentioned earlier the other amicus briefs. There's a range of advocates who have supported Sundiata's case in the Supreme Court. And one of them is a number of organizations of Black law enforcement officers and departments. Their position mirrors ours, and in particular supports what Alex told you a little while ago, which is how silly it is for us to be spending as much money as we spend on keeping people caged when they are in no danger whatsoever because they're so old. There's terrific briefs on the fact that, you know, the public defender's office was not even involved in the case because in parole you don't even get representation. So the public defender's office came in as an amicus, which is a friend of the court, and they argued that Sundiata was being held because he did not have a good recollection of what he had done, so that he could not take responsibility for it fully. Well, he, at the time, way back, he had blacked out and had no idea what had occurred. I mean, that's true. But beyond that, this idea that older people who have waning memories, who have onset of dementia, should be responsible for what they no longer remember is ridiculous. It's inhumane. And honestly, in my view, it's completely unconstitutional, and certainly does not bespeak the kind of society that I want to be a member of.
Thank you for that. And let me say this about Sundiata. And I say this as somebody who has known him for over 25 years and who met him as a college student. He has expressed remorse. He has acknowledged the terrible tragedy that occurred on that turnpike in 1973. I have heard him express that remorse to me. I have heard him write of it, express it to other people. He's expressed it to the parole board for years. When I met Sundiata, it was when he was first becoming eligible. Back, you said in 1993. When he was first becoming eligible for parole. That was the year I was supposed to graduate from college. I had to drop out and go back later, but that's another story. But when I met Sundiata, this whole idea that he has not expressed remorse. It's something that we know, and I'll use a theological term for that it's a lie. You know, it's an absolute lie. And it was a blessing that we were able last month in August to bring together clergy, to bring together from different faith traditions. You know, we had support from the Muslim community, from the Jewish community, from the African traditional community, from the Christian community. And we all came together and we went and over the overpass and we prayed for the officer, Werner Forrester, who was killed that night in 1973. We prayed for the officer Harper that was also shot and injured. We prayed for the family also of Zaid Shakur. We prayed for everyone that was in that car, for Assata Shakur, for Sundiata Acoli. And one of the things, a powerful message that one of our rabbis said, he talked about teshuvah. And he talked about this idea of forgiveness and reconciliation and what's required. And if we continue to hold on to vengeance, and if we continue to have a deaf ear and lie when people express their remorse and they take responsibility and we do not forgive, we become responsible for the violation. We become responsible for the offense. And so we need to be truth tellers. Like you said earlier, Larry, you know, I don't even argue the specifics of the case as it relates to what happened back in, you know, when I was 2 years old. I don't argue those details. When I was 20, you know, I was having all kinds of conversations and looking at these things and going back and forth. What I know today, and there is no argument, is that Sundiata Acoli has served every year, every month, every week, every day, every hour that he should have served if he did everything that he was convicted of. He is eligible and has been eligible for parole for almost 30 years. He is someone who is not a threat to society. He is not a threat of recidivism. If he was, you wouldn't have a prison system that was having him teach classes to prepare prisoners to leave from prison. And so we know that he is an octogenarian. He is a father. He is a grandfather. He is beloved. We know that he's sick. We know that his life is in danger. I don't need to talk about any of the politics at all. And when we look at so many of our seniors that are locked in cages and that are dying, the politics have to be put to the side and we have to deal with the humanity of the individual. I mentioned a number of those who have been in prison for a long time because of their political activities and their work. I did mention Kamal Siddiqui, who is 68 years old. He was convicted in 2003. He has a left leg that is infected. He's had hepatitis C, cirrhosis of the liver, sarcoidosis. This is something, when we look at our elderly population in the state of New Jersey and around the country, we have to see that we have a moral and a health crisis that has to be addressed. We have to go and we have to speak, and I'm seeing that we still don't have our brother. I wish we had Brother Marvin Ellison, who was going to speak to us also as someone who has served in prison and giving his perspective, and the as being an elder in prisons, as someone who maxed out in terms of his time there in prison. But we have to know, and I say this to members of my congregation. You know, most churches have what they call a sick and shut-in list. The people that have been on the top of our sick and shut-in list at Witherspoon Street Presbyterian Church here in Princeton, New Jersey, have been Sundiata Acoli. Cynthia, we've had a large group of women from the Edna Mahan Correctional Facility that have been on our sick and shut-in list for almost 2 years now, 2.5 years. And we have to know that these are the women and men that we must prioritize in our legal work, in our political work, in our prayer work, in our advocacy work. If you go to the Sundiata Acoli Freedom Campaign website, and you can just hashtag bring Sundiata home, and it'll take you right there. You can see that there's petitions that are being signed. You can see that there are postcards that are being filled out. We need to speak to New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy and tell him to bring Sundiata home. We need to be advocating and supporting and encouraging. I mean, it has to tell you something when law enforcement organizations like the Black law enforcement organizations that filed this amicus briefs are saying, oh, you know what, this doesn't make any sense. He's not a threat. He's someone who needs to come home. And as you said, there is lawlessness. There is a lack of any kind of commitment to science. There's a lack of any kind of commitment to morality or rationality or logic or statistical support. It's vengeance, it's hatred, it's looking at older Black men and older Black women and older brown men and older brown women and older people in general. It's been said you can measure the quality of a society by how well it takes care of people who are in their earliest years, their children, and those in the twilight of their years, their seniors. We're failing in New Jersey. We can't say thank God for Mississippi or anywhere else. We are failing statistically, and it is our responsibility to speak up. We want to hear from the voices of the people who have joined this call, and I'm thankful that we have had so many who have hung out with us and received this information. I'm seeing we have some great people who are on and giving chats, and as I said before, some of you are putting chats in putting questions in the chat box, and I'm not going to be able to find those. You will be able to find the address for where you can write Sundiata Acoli. He's prison number 39794-066. He's in the Federal Correctional Institution in Cumberland, Maryland. P.O. Box 1000, Cumberland, Maryland 21501. Go to the chat box, scroll through there and find it. He is a state of New Jersey prisoner, convicted on New Jersey crimes, that has been held in federal facilities going back to the 1970s. That is another reality of his incarceration. Sundiata has been treated in a certain way. There were times when he was here in New Jersey, when he was in a cell that was smaller than what was required for a German Shepherd dog. This is the treatment that he has suffered over almost 50 years. But I'm going to ask that if you have questions, and I'm going to route them back to our panelists, I really want you to put them in the Q&A box. There's a different box. There's a link for your chat, and then there's another link, and it looks like there's two little bubbles for Q&A. And so I only have a few questions there, but I'm going to start with let me see. I'll start with the first one, and maybe this will go to Alex. There's a question about the federal statistics and some of the documents that you referenced. Can you say a little bit about how that information can be accessed, where it's available? I know we had talked about sharing some of that through this platform, but can you talk a little bit, Alex, about if people want to get some of the data and some of the statistics that you cited as it relates to incarceration in the state of New Jersey, as it relates to life without the possibility of parole, recidivism, and then after you, Alex, if Larry, if you could also speak to that as well, because you cited some documents. The thing is sometimes when the truth hits you so hard they can't believe it. And so you have to give them a place and give folks a place where you can, certainly no one who's watching here tonight, but as we share it with other people, so we can share this information, and where can they find this data? Alex, I'll ask you to answer that first.
So the Sentencing Project, we're known for our research. But there are several specific reports that I would recommend that you go to. One is called No End in Sight, which talks about life and life without parole. The other, somebody earlier in the chat asked a question about what is Second Look. Second Look is a mechanism that can be put through legislatures in order to get people sentenced, reduced, or to allow them to be free. You can see more information about that in the publication that I just put in the chat. And if you ever have any questions, you can always email me at abailey@sentencingproject.org. But I tell you what, Reverend, I got those numbers for you on racial disparities. We love a good number around here. So 64% of people serving life and virtual life sentences, this is the 2020 data, 66% 64% are Black, 21% are white, 13% are Latinx, and 1% identify as other, which is pretty staggering. So if this is the type of data that you need, arm yourself with the facts and understand that we can write the most beautiful pieces of legislation. We can make the most powerful legal arguments. We can be filled with all of the righteousness in the world. But if legislators do not feel political power, if they do not feel political pressure to do something differently, then we will not succeed, which is why there has to be a movement behind this. You have to be unwilling to vote for people who will not take a stance on this issue. You have to hold people's feet to the fire. You need to demand that New Jersey do differently. And I think we'll come back to more of that later, but the federal numbers are also there. But we have Second Look legislation currently going through the federal government, introduced by Cory Booker. Hopefully that sets a new precedent for states to look at resentencing folks. But Larry, I'll hand it over to you to fill in as well.
Yeah, then we're going to go back to Cynthia because we have some questions for you too.
For sure. We need to hear from Cynthia. Let me just first just completely endorse what Alex has just said. The voices of people need to be heard. And let's be clear, this is even true in my experience, and I've been doing this a long time in courts. Judges know they understand the politics. They read the newspaper. So when you all exercise political power and say that this is important to the community, they hear that. It may not influence a decision in any given case, but over time, it makes a huge difference. You need to do that. I'm not going to go through the specific reports, but I will tell you, and I will make available to anybody who wants it. We filed our amicus brief on behalf of the American Friends Service Committee, one of the great organizations anywhere, and in this state for sure. An organization that really truly fights for not only elderly inmates, but all inmates and many other disenfranchised and underrepresented people. I'm so proud to have done that. And in that amicus brief, we cite a whole bunch of studies, including a bunch of federal studies, social science. It's all in there, and I'm happy to provide all that to you. Let me just say one thing, and then we should definitely let Cynthia talk. Reverend, one point you made is about young people. Over the last 10 years or so, this has been a big theme of what I've been working on, which is juvenile justice issues. And this goes to a question that I saw in the chat earlier about what's meant by a look, the term that Alex used earlier. The way the fight is going for juvenile justice has to do with the fact that people are being sentenced to very lengthy terms, while we, at a time when science shows and we can see that their brains are still developing, that we shouldn't be putting them away for life because we don't know who they really are as people. They don't know who they really are as people. And so that legislation goes to the fact of when is somebody going to get another look? When is a judge or a reasonable board going to take a look at them and say, are they rehabilitated? Or was this the person who committed the crime a different person than the person who exists now?
Yeah.
The juvenile justice, the other end of the spectrum, the young people, is as much of a travesty, and by the way, just as racist as the older end. But there's something that's just so wrong about having an older person who is harmless being held in prison on the grounds that they are a risk to society. It's not true.
Right. So thank you, Larry. So we got to show up. We got to go inside. You know, I say to church people all the time, they always want to say, well, I'll pray for you. And God will take care of it. Oftentimes they want to pray for people so they don't have to go and do what they're supposed to do. And
you know what my grandmother used to say, Reverend?
What's
she used
that?
to say, pray to God, but row away from the rocks.
There you go. There you go. And
Marvin's here.
I see that. I'm about to call on him next. I am so happy that we have connected with our brother Marvin Ellison. But we at least are doing that. I mean, at least in my church, they're on our sick and shut-in list, and we send birthday cards and holiday cards and try to let people know that when we do bring them home, when they do come home, that there will be a community and a family, because for many of them, that community, particularly for our older people, has passed away. And we need to know, and Cynthia, I just want to thank you, because people need to know that there's more than statistics. There are real flesh and blood human beings, amazing people. You have gone, you are a graduate of the Rutgers University School of Criminal Justice. You are doing work. You are committed. You are exactly who we need. And if people could see real people rather than the images and the representations of what incarcerated people or formerly incarcerated people look like, perhaps their minds and their hearts would be shifted. So thank you for sharing your story and your wisdom and your counsel with us. I want to turn to Marvin, because Marvin, we lost you earlier, but our brother Marvin Ellison maxed out after serving 33 years, 9 months.
Cut you out for what? Get him, Doc.
No,
Get him, Doc. Get him.
Am I all right? Am I saying it right? So
behind bars.
Say it again.
Yeah.
Oh, we have some group talk. So brother, I just want you to talk about, you have been a city employee for the last 5 years or so. You are the CEO of a re-entry transitional housing nonprofit called Returning Citizens Cooperative Corporation. And in addition, you own a cleaning company, Full Throttle Cleaning Services and Supplies LLC, and you hire primarily the formerly incarcerated. And so we're talking about seniors. We're talking about older people who have been caged in prisons. Brother, can you just give us some perspective on what's happening inside with our older people? What do we need to know and what do we need to do?
Well, unfortunately, you do have individuals who've been incarcerated in their youth. For instance, there's an individual named James Rodwell. He was initially incarcerated in 1967. Okay. This individual is just lost in the system. If a person has certain notoriety, there's complex issues in dealing with that person. Then you have the invisible, who nobody knows, that's simply dying and passing away. Unknown, unheard of. They don't exist. Prison is not geared to assist the elderly because it primarily is hard for hardened criminals who come in their youth. But once their youth is gone and they're still there, you still have them under the same circumstances that you was dealing with them when they were young, vibrant, and perhaps hostile. Now they're passive, fragile, but they're still in the same condition. There's no accommodation and recognition that this person no longer poses a threat. He's not a threat to anyone. He's fragile. But none of the conditions in the prison addresses that situation. And as far as hospice, they send you to Southwood simply to die. Not to help you.
Tell us about that Southwoods hospital situation in terms of the hospice at Southwood State Prison.
Okay, when I was transferred to hospice 6 months before I maxed out, as the police was searching through my property, he simply stated that, so they sent you down here, you know? So his inference was that they sent me there to die, not knowing that I was maxing out. Because when you reach a certain age in prison and you don't have so-called institutional fractions and stuff like that there, that's where they send you. They send you to Southwood. And that's where you pass away at. They send you there to die. They don't send you there to help you, to assist you, to motivate you, to bring any life to you. They send you there to literally die.
Die.
And for the most part, everybody who ends up there, that's been in the system for a while, that's doing a lengthy sentence, that's where they go. They go there to die.
Marvin, we lost your video. I don't know if you can turn that back on from your phone.
Probably because I'm walking around. I'm outside. I'm at North Conservancy, where we have a support meeting for the formerly incarcerated, and we had the presence of the deputy mayor and different people down here.
Okay.
So I've been walking around. Hey, I don't even know. But prison makes no accommodation for the aging. Where's your mother?
That's what I'm trying to tell you.
It makes no accommodation for the aging, and at some point we have to recognize that certain individuals who might have had a certain notoriety in their youth are no longer that person.
Yep.
You understand? Like, I mean, I was a different person in my youth. I was, I was totally peace. I was a totally different type of person, but that is not who left the prison.
Right.
But if it hadn't been for me having a match state, I would still be in prison, because they didn't recognize the change. They didn't recognize the difference between Marvin Ellison, the mature, older prisoner, was different from Marvin Ellison, the perhaps cocky prisoner.
Mm-hmm.
When you transition from one value scheme to another value scheme, you drop that which was your past. But the system just deal with you with your past, regardless of how old that past is.
Right.
The prison system will say that, well, you skipped school in the 5th grade. Like, what does that have to do with me as a grown adult male? Right. You're telling me that it's consequential to me today because I skipped school in the 3rd grade.
Mm-hmm.
This is some of the nonsense that they will confront you with to justify not paroling you. Hey, Star, come here. Put this on.
You're right, Brother Marvin. I mean, and that notoriety is something that has been tracked and tagged on Sundiata Acoli, going all the way back to 1973. That case back on May 2nd, 1973 is the most politicized. It's the most notorious case that you have in the state of New Jersey. And so reason, logic, change, growth, development, transformation, all of the things that happen over time are completely dismissed. They can't see past the 1970s. They can't see past. And again, if they really wanted to look, they would see someone who even in his youth was someone, Sundiata Acoli, who is a mathematician, who worked for NASA, who tutored Neil Armstrong in math, who graduated from Prairie View University in Texas, who was accomplished, someone who made commitments to do voting rights and voter registration. But they can't get past what happened on May 2nd, 1973. And so vengeance and revenge is what's on the front of everything. And we can't see that we need to bring this 84, almost 85-year-old man home after being in prison almost 50 years.
Reverend, can I say one thing about the 1970s versus today? Because I think it's another piece of information that everybody here needs.
Sure. Absolutely.
So you have to understand that the national lifer population at this point in time exceeds the entire prison population in 1970.
What?
The lifer
population
just
alone.
the lifer population. I'm not talking about anybody else. I'm just talking about the lifer population. Exceeds the entirety of the prison population in 1970. Keep that in mind, because if 1973 is a year that sticks for you, Reverend, because of your brother, that is a time where things really started to change. And most people don't realize the downward slide that we have decided to go on since then.
Right. Well, there's been a lot of discussion about mass incarceration in this country. and how it began and was connected to this war on drugs and the shifts that occurred in the 1970s with Richard Nixon and everything else. And there are still casualties. There are still casualties that remain within the system, and the system contorted and shifted and morphed into something that is an offense to anyone who has a commitment to human rights, to anyone who has a real commitment to science, to anyone has a real commitment to the rule of law, to anyone who has a real commitment to justice. And so I just want to thank each and every one of you who have shared your voices and have helped us to see a little better, to hear a little better, to think a little better. But I pray that we will do a little better. Sister said, when you know better, you do better. I hope that that will be true. Because if you sat and you listened and you watched over the course of the last hour and a half, you received all kinds of information. You received personal perspective from people who have lived it and have survived it. And they've given testimony and witness to what it is that they've seen, and they've given us words about what it is that we need to do. You've heard experts who have given us statistical analysis and a legal critique of what's going on in the case of Sundiata Acoli and with senior prisoners in the state of New Jersey, in contrast and in comparison to what's happening all around the country. And if you've heard all of this, and if you've digested all of this, and you're still the same after 8:30 than you were before 7 o'clock, then something's wrong, and maybe we can't even continue to spend our time with you. We need to work on the rest of the reasonable people that we know live and pay taxes in the state of New Jersey, that we know that have great-grandparents and grandparents and parents. I cannot imagine when I look at my members, if I see my 60-year-olds. I did a funeral today with a man who in the city of Trenton who was 84 years old. And he was blessed to live 84 years old and to be there with his family and his friends and his brothers and his nieces and nephews. He had the blessing of living out a full life. And when he was funeralized, it was done the way it was supposed to be done. I believe that Sundiata, if we can get him out of prison, has years left to live. He'll get the health care that he needs. He'll get the love and attention that he deserves. He'll live in a place that is designed to accommodate who he is and what he is in this stage of his life. And I believe that for so many, that we've forgotten them. Like Brother Marvin said, if you don't have a name, then you become invisible. And you are tossed away and dismissed and left to die, just as those who have a name and a reputation and have the energy and the animus of those who want to keep them in prison until they die. We have to do better. We have to bring Sundiata home. Please, right now, if you haven't already done it, hashtag bring Sundiata home. Go to the website, sign the petition, fill out a postcard, talk to your legislators, talk to your governor. The governor's coming to you now saying on November 2nd, I need for you to cast a vote for Governor Phil Murphy. You know what? I'm tired of giving away my vote for nothing. If we cannot bring about some real demands and some real answers and solutions that solve and deliverables, then we have to completely transform and change how we are considering what political dialogue and exchange is supposed to look like. You don't just get to do what you're doing and expect our support. So
Amen.
make the phone calls, send the emails, send the text messages. We have to do better. We know better now. There's no excuse. Alexandra gave us a statistical lesson and links to go for other information. Larry gave us a legal a preview of what's coming before the Supreme Court and what needs to be done. And Larry, I pray that you're right. We're going to win this one. But Sundiata told me something a long time ago, and Cynthia and Marvin, I'm sure you would agree. He said, the people matter. I asked Sundiata when I was in my early 20s, I said, so Sundiata, so when they gonna let you out? And he said, why are you asking me that question? He said, you have to decide. The people have to decide that they're going to bring me home. And when the people make that decision, that's when I'm going to come home. Our seniors will not be treated this way in New Jersey prisons when we listen to what Marvin and Cynthia said to us and we say, no more are you going to treat our great-grandparents and our grandparents and our parents in this way. No more are you going to try to have this lawlessness and this ridiculousness and say that someone who is in their 70s or 80s or in their 90s is a threat to recidivism and they're going to commit a crime again. No. These are human beings, men and women who are loved and beloved. And so I thank all of you. I thank Cynthia Coop. I thank Brother Marvin Ellison and the great work that both of you all are continuing to do as you're continuing to serve as advocates. I thank you to Larry Lustberg, and I thank you to Alexandra Bailey. Thank you for the work that you all are doing on the front lines. And I give thanks to all of those who are a part of the Bring Sundiata Home Alliance, all of those who are a part of the Freedom Campaign. Thank you for the work that you're doing and the work that you're continuing to do. We lift up our prayers for all of you because we know that this is a struggle that we're in together. I pray for all of those connected. I want to say a special prayer and a word to our sister Fayemi Shakur in the midst of her loss that she suffered in Newark. We love you, sister. We're here for you. We are here for each other. I am because we are. We are because I am. We have to be connected and committed to each other. So I thank all of you for your time. I thank all of you for listening. Please get connected. Help us to do this work. And we give thanks for the victories that are yet to come. Thank you.